way. Tonight, we will be discussing David's book, The Naassenes, Exploring an Early Christian Identity, and a book I really enjoyed. Again, as I had the sniffles last weekend, it was just a great read to sit around and really bask into this great wisdom of the ancients. So, David, tell us how you came to write this book.
Well, first of all, I appreciate you having me on to spread the word. Not everybody knows the Naassenes, but I think we all should make an effort. They were, in terms of the popular dimension, it's a cult about gnosis, sex, and snakes. And, I just don't know who is not interested in that sort of stuff. Now, as is my duty as a historian, I'm here to tell you, what we can and cannot know about this group. In 2016, I released my translation of The Refutation of All Heresies. And this is a book by an anonymous Christian writer. And it is our sole source for the Naassenes, because this writer reproduced what is usually called the Naascene Sermon, or as I just call it, the Naascene Discourse. And so it was, in a sense, inevitable that from this general study, I would focus with laser attention on this particular group. And since I noticed that in English, there really wasn't a good, solid, scholarly monograph that was also comprehensible and accessible to the average Joe or Jane, I decided to take the opportunity.
Yeah, and I'm glad you did. Yeah, you said what snakes, sex, and gnosis. I was thinking of Conan the Barbarian and Tulsa Doom, but it's not as exciting as that, David, is it? You don't have Darth Vader and as the preacher and all this wonderful, and Arnold Schwarzenegger storming up the stairs to kill him and all that.
Right.
But it still has. Well, that's the key too. Is that maybe you can start to explain the name Nassene, because it's sometimes confusing because again, Nassenes means snake. I mean, your book has a snake, my promo has a snake, but are there really snakes with the Nassenes? It's kind of a paradox, or I don't know. It's odd.
Right. Yeah. So Gnostics are associated with snakes, and that's definitely the case. And Naas is a Greek transliteration of the Hebrew Nachash, which does mean snake, and there's no doubt about that. So the question then is who's calling them the Naassenes? Are they calling themselves that? And what is the actual role of snakes? Interestingly enough, there is certainly material on snakes, but it's not overwhelming. What the Naascene author says, as I'd like to call him, the Naascene preacher, whom I consider to be a real Gnostic of late antique Alexandria, he says that, yeah, there are serpent symbols in every temple under heaven. And he seems, in his own context, to be specifically referring to Agathos Daimon. And Agathos Daimon was one of these very, very popular civic deities in Alexandria. And I've got some videos on him on the Patreon. Agathos Daimon is usually manifest as a snake, and his name means the good spirit. And you can go to Alexandria today underground and still see images of this good spirit guarding the tombs of the dead. He was the giver of good things, and the Alexandrians had images of him both in their homes, in their marketplaces, and guarding their temples. And the serpentine image, which is of course also a phallic image, is very prevalent in temples. And the point for the Nicene preacher is to say that the snake really is a symbol of Jesus, and the snake really is the true recipient of worship, sometimes or most often unknowingly, by people who go and visit these temples. The imagery is unavoidable, the meaning is overpowering.
No, makes sense. And other than that, I'm trying to think. There is the argument, and I know you address this in your book that April DeConnick makes in the Gnostic New Age, that in the Nassene cosmology, there's the great moisture, the primordial essence or consciousness. And that can possibly, she draws parallels to the Egyptian idea of a tomb, that there's this snake sort of half asleep in the moisture. What do you think of that?
I don't buy that. It just simply because there's just no evidence in the surviving sermon. Now, that being said, I don't at all deny that this author knew a good bit of Egyptian mythology and that he was extremely familiar with his own native Alexandrian cultural rites, and that he knew the significance of snakes. And for both Egyptians and Greeks, snakes weren't just one thing. They weren't just symbols of wisdom. They were symbols of many things. And so the only caution I would put here for your listeners and your viewers is look at the multiple meanings of snakes, both in Greco-Roman antiquity and among the Egyptians, and see if you can make connections. But I just want to urge people, um, the Nicene sermon, I've made it available in a new translation and a reconstruction in the book. Go read it in full, and let me know what you think. I mean, I'm happy to be corrected, but I want to follow and I want to be controlled by that text itself, because the overwhelming temptation, I think, of many, we get duly excited about snakes and about other kinds of mythology, and we start then kind of putting the Nicene sermon through the meat grinder of these other frameworks and mythologies. And what I've tried to do in the book is to let the sermon be the controlling factor and only base myself on the direct evidence of the text, which is all that we have. And I assure everyone here in this virtual room, you will enter into a great cathedral of overwhelming and powerful imagery that will flood your senses and amaze you at every turn. The author of this text, I mean, such a slender line of transmission that we got it. His mind is like a great cave, and there's 1,000 echoes going off. And doubtless, when you read this text, you will also hear 1,000 or 10,000 echoes. And I'm merely, as a historian, just opening the text, maybe holding your hand, but you're going to be amazed, as the preacher himself says, by the associations and connections that are made here.
It's quite an odyssey. Before we get into a summary of it, so we can say, as you've been mentioning, David, the Nassenes, likely the preacher came from Alexandria, somewhere in Egypt. You date them probably what, end of the second century, early third century. So
Yep.
that right there. And then the Nassenes never called themselves Nassenes, but doesn't the refutator say they call themselves Gnostics, or does he call them Gnostics?
That's right. Yeah, the Naassenes are very important because, unlike the Sethians, whom David Brecky and others call Gnostics with a capital G, um, we don't have any actual evidence of them doing that. But for the Naassenes, they do call themselves Gnostics. That's their name for themselves, along with the Carpocratians. So that's very significant. That is what they called themselves. But their chief name for themselves, and I like to always hammer this home for people because it's so easy to forget this. Their chief name for themselves is Christians. In fact, as the preacher says, "Hey mis mani Christiani," we are the only Christians.
Mm.
So that's how he called himself.
Yeah, at the same time, you say he's an exclusivist, but a universalist and cosmopolitan. So he, like you said, he's got a lot of things going on in his head or her head or whoever this person was, right?
Yeah, that's the interesting tension. You've got the preacher who very well could be female. We don't know. But you've got the preacher referring to salvation in exclusivist terms, saying that only a few people are going to get it. But on the other hand, he's this wild eyed universalist who's saying that the truth is under every rock. You turn around and there's a symbol there that is meant for you. And that symbol, it doesn't matter which religion or culture or nation you grew up in, there's a divine symbol system designed to get you toward the truth. And he will literally use anything and everything. If he was alive today, I mean, I'm sure he would be using um, everything from sports to
Su-
Disneyland to
Superheroes.
the New York Times. Yeah, I mean, literally, he was able to make connections in his own time and culture that no other Christian made, and are unprecedented for any other thinker in antiquity. I mean, he is the only thinker, and we'll get to this. He's the only thinker who said that Attis really is Jesus, and that Jesus really is Attis, who is also Hermes. And he actually sits down and proves it to you by making the connections, and he connects them all back to Agathos Daimon and the snake, and he says they are all symbols of the same thing. And the symbols that you see daily, whether you're walking on the street or you're in a temple or you're just going to get a glass of water, there are signs and symbols in this world that are leading you toward truth. And the truth is one, and he's going to lead you to it.
Well,
Wow.
that's not necessarily contradictory to the fact that he thinks his movement is exclusive, right? Because he could say that only our movement can see all these symbols or interpret them, and if you say this means this and we disagree, then you're wrong, right? Couldn't that be it?
Well, yeah, no, I'm not saying there's any contradiction at all. And in fact, this works quite well with him. He's an exclusiveness in terms of he's an exclusivist in terms of gnosis.
Yeah.
Uh, and he says that his group alone has the gnosis, which is a classic Gnostic claim. But the gnosis really is available to all, and it's not. There's no class system preventing you from getting it, but it just turns out that only a very small group has it. So yes.
And also, wasn't Attis a eunuch? Didn't he castrate himself? Does he saying that Jesus castrated himself?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting debated point, and it's one of those points where I probably am going to defer and to disappoint some people. Um, this author talks a lot about cutting the penis off, and I have called him phallocentric in the sense that, not in the sense that he is, a rabid masculine or masculinist ideology, androcentric, SOB, but in the sense that he is always thinking about phalloid, that is penises, and he's very, very into penis imagery as a spiritual sign of what he calls spiritual maleness. And this is why he's able This is his tool to get so much riches out of the Attis and Cybele cult, which is, as you know, all based on the tragic drama of a young shepherd boy who, in a fit of madness, cut off his own penis and testicles. And the Nicene preacher loves this story and says that Attis, that's Jesus, and everyone needs to engage in this act of spiritual eunuchism. Everyone needs to rip off their male part and let that ascend to heaven. And when some readers hear this, they think, well, is he speaking literally, or is he just speaking on a spiritual plane, or what's going on here? Did he actually castrate himself? And this is what the refutator says. He says, in order to make fun of the Nicene preacher, that the preacher is so committed to the ideology of no marriage and no sex on earth that he resembles a castrated priest of Cybele.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that he was one, right? So this is a classic heresiological insult. What we know of the Nicene preacher is that he is Platonist to the core. And so he's not primarily focused on bodies, he's primarily focused on minds and spirits. And just like so many Platonists in antiquity and so many Gnostics in antiquity, they lived in this allegorical universe where maleness and the purification of maleness, and we find this in the Gnostic Gospels all the time, just means separating yourself from your passions and the body, because earth and violent emotions are unfortunately associated with femaleness in antiquity very, very consistently, and maleness is associated with spirituality independent of all flesh. I won't say all body, but all flesh and all the raging emotions of grief, anger, greed, and so on. So this author is demanding spiritual eunuchism, and that's a requirement for entering the church. But I do not actually think that he had the scalpel in his hand and was knocking off men's dicks in order to get people in.
Yeah, and as you say, David, in their cosmology, the supreme archetypal being is, we call him the son of human, but it's a son of man, and it's sort of, again, this Plato idea of androgyny. We want to get rid of our animal sides and just be unified as the son of human is in the shape of Christ.
That's right. Yeah, he's a classic Platonist in that respect, that he believes that divine is androgynous, but
Mhm.
enragingly, he keeps referring to the divine as male. But all that means on the allegorical level is that the divine is pure mind, and what we call male and female on the, let's say, the noetic level has nothing to do with dicks and vaginas. I'm sorry to be so brutish here, but
Mhm.
it has to, maleness and femaleness is a spiritual quality for this author. And the fact that, the gender wars are caused by the fact that we all associate maleness and females with bodies and body parts. And
Mhm.
as a Platonist, this author thinks that that's the greatest and most fundamental mistake you can make. Femaleness is spirit, maleness is spirit, and we're getting back to the androgynous son of the human. And the way we do that is by, as he says, enragingly and almost as a contradiction, but not really a contradiction, separate your maleness from your femaleness below so that you can become androgynous above.
Yeah, I like how in one part, David, you say that if we can find the central theme of the preacher, it's this: God is human, and the human, when fully understood, is God. I love it. It's very pithy, straight to the mark, and it reminds me of when I interviewed Stephen Davis, and he appears in Voices of Gnosticism. He said the same thing about the Secret Book of John. It's a story of how God became human, and if we reverse the process, the way of ascent is the way of descent. We can become God again. So that idea was in the air with these groups.
Absolutely, yeah. So on my Patreon, I've got an episode called "The God, Human, and Human Gods," and I've also got an academic article on that, which I can share with people. It's called "The God, Human, and Human Gods," and this is a central Gnostic belief. If you're thinking of a core Gnostic theology, at least for antiquity, is that God is human with the capital H. Now, you might have various tiers of the Godhead, but at least one of the tiers, one of the upper tiers, is you have a makanthropos, and this is in Judaism as well, and in Jewish mysticism as well. It's probably where it ultimately comes from. But the incarnation, Christians, we just celebrated Christmas, and for part of the world, Christmas is coming up on January 6th, and that they're all get all excited about the incarnation. Whereas the Gnostics thought that the incarnation was just so logical. I mean, it's the natural form of God. It's like God returning, or God manifesting God's self in the image of which he already is, or she already is, the archetype. So in a sense, the incarnation is the most banal of all divine acts. It is God's own natural appearance. But on the other hand, that's not to deny that it's a wondrous miracle, and we should give gifts to each other, if not for that reason, then just to get drunk when it's really dark out. But this is important, and not only the Naassenes, but the Valentinians and the Sethians, they are all agreed on the God human, and they all are going back to the New Testament, and they're saying, hey, look at how many times Jesus refers himself to the Son of the human. He refers to himself as the Son of the human, and that's I say that in that awkward way because that's what the Greek says. It's hachios to anthropou, which isn't Son of Man, but it's the Son of the human. It's always the human, and that human can only refer to a superior deity. So Jesus is constantly referring to the human in the sky, who happens to be his father. So if he's the son of the human, then there is a human, the human, up there, who is God.
Beautifully said, and I love it. And in their cosmology, what exactly happens for the audience? Where's the high drama? The son of human or the son of man, he falls, and there's also a version of Yaldabaoth. I always forget his name, Isaldius. Maybe tell the audience a little bit about the Nassine Hyde cosmic drama.
Well, some people talk about the Gnostic myth. I never like to talk about the Gnostic myth. I always like to let each text speak for itself, because they have general themes in common, but they're not all the same. So the Nassenes are going to have their own particular take on reality. And you get a lot of the Nassene theology from the Nassene Psalm. And I've got I think I've got that on just for free on YouTube. The Nassene Psalm is one of these, probably, I would say, one of the most beautiful, if not the most beautiful of all Gnostic prayers, which were put to music. We've lost the music, but we've got the prayer. And it's a story of the soul wandering as a deer, and Jesus having then a conversation with his father and asking him, sort of like if you've ever read John Milton's Paradise Lost, the father and the son, they have this conversation. Much like God and Abraham, before Sodom and Gomorrah, and they're like, oh, all these people are going to die. Why don't you send me and I'll go down? And Jesus repeatedly says, I'll go down, I'll fight off every demon, I'll break every chain. I will show every seal. I will show the path of Gnosis. And, I'm paraphrasing, but it's very powerful. And I would love to hear the music to it. But yes, the theology is basically binitarian in the sense that there's a human and there's a son of the human, and they are ontologically one. So there's, um, the homoousios applies here, consubstantiality applies here. It's not a trinity. The Naassenes are binitarians, and they think that the son manifestation of deity, comes into the world in various manifestations, and not just Jesus, but as Attis and as Osiris and as um, Adonis. And the symbols are all tracked back to this child of the human, as I like to call him. And of course, he also appeared in Jesus, the son of Maryam.
Mm-hmm.
But the symbols are all, going back to the same thing. And his view of reality is that there was a primitive religion of humankind, that humankind in the early days, we were all worshippers of Jesus, and we worshiped him in the form of the snake. And that's why in temples today, that is speaking from the preacher's perspective, that's why in temples today, these snake, serpentine, phallic images survive in every temple. Um, but we've forgotten the original religion of Jesus and as a serpent cult. But at every moment, we are able to realize the truth and to get back to our divine origins. I'm really not doing justice to this. I'm sorry. Read the
No,
book.
you are. Yeah, no. Well, I read the books. Of course, I'm getting it because it's such a wonderful journey, and you really get us into the mind and the heart of the preacher, and the beautiful poetry, and what a journey he takes us. I think of some like ancient travel blogger, because you're going to Phrygia and going here, and he's tying in the symbols, and he's bringing in the Gospel of Thomas and Homer and the Pauline letters, and he's talking about Osiris. It's like you said, you're on like this amazing ride through history and the cosmos. It just doesn't end, and it's good that you, Elise, and the refutator are there to sort of, okay, this is what's going on, because you could get so lost in things. But would you say that, again, bringing in April, that a lot of this, the the work is a ritual in itself to meet God, or what's the summary you would say of what the preacher's trying to do? Because I mean, obviously, like you say, David, in ancient times, everything had to be theatrical. You talk about how it's likely the preacher knew of theatrics and how to market this stuff. He wasn't like in some Alexandrian Starbucks just reading and everybody like, you had to sell this stuff and make it into a ritual and get people in the right frame of mind. So what do you think of the whole summary or the text itself and what it's trying to do?
Well, this guy or this gal lived in the real Alexandria, and the real Alexandria
And
at the
you and I want to live there too if we had a choice.
at the height of its spiritual beauty and majesty, Alexandria of the late second century, 100 years before the Christians even really became close to 25% of the population, which is really a fourth century phenomenon. This guy was a Christian in a world dominated by Hellenic and Egyptian cults. And he, instead of crossing his fingers and spitting and um, saying that all the temples were houses of demons, he opened up his arms and said, I welcome every pagan symbol. I can understand you in terms of Jesus, which is enraging to some, because you want to say, can't you just outgrow Jesus? But this is what this is what he does. And I would say all that we have, Miguel, is a sermon. But the Nicene preacher was a Christian, and this is one of the texts where, and I don't think this of every text, but this is one of the texts that reading and rereading, I am more and more convinced that we can reconstruct what his rituals looked like.
Mm.
And it's because he is so emphatic that he's got two things which other Christians don't have. But the form of the ritual is the same. The form of the ritual is a baptism and anointing. But the preacher says that he has water in which people are washed that is unspeakable, and he has ointment which is also unspeakable. And so he's naming his two primary sacraments. It's a sacrament of water purification, and it's a sacrament of anointing with some sort of oil or perfume. And those are the things that make you a Christian. In fact, in that very passage which I quoted, Hemis Mani Christiani, he says, we are the only Christians because we are the only ones anointed, which is Kriamene,
Mhm.
with the true ointment. Now, not everyone is familiar with anointing rituals. These do still survive in some churches today, but they were very popular in second and third century Alexandria, in Egypt and Syria. And usually the anointing with oil would represent some kind of power of the Spirit, the light power of the Spirit. And you would get this immediately after being washed. And in addition, the Nicene preacher talked about a cup, which also almost, certainly refers to a type of Eucharist ceremony. And he associates the cup, interestingly, with divination practices, that the cup gives you a cognitive boost, a clairvoyance, and a power to see the truth which you have not seen before. So those are the three sacraments: baptism, anointing, and the Eucharist. That sounds so ordinary, but what the preacher has done is he's modified those rituals in very important ways to say that his form of the ritual is the only form which can transform you in body and mind and cognitively restructure you so that you become a true knower and a true Christian. Classic move, but he does it well.
But at the
Drugs,
same,
you think?
at the same time, what you also say that the baptism, we don't know what baptism is. I mean, it's still mysterious. Like you talk about the paraphrase of Shem, you mentioned using it's against regular baptism, and there might be another text like the trimorphic pretanoia, the baptism happens in another heaven. So we still don't know if they're using water, or Evan says if they're using drugs. We just don't know what the goodies are.
Yeah, it's not like the Didache, if you're familiar with that text, where it's a manual, like the sort of the Methodist book of discipline. We don't have that. We just have his references to it. But yeah, on the use of entheogens, that's often where people go. And I often say to people, I am totally open to that.
Mm.
Just show me, beyond speculation where that might be. Of course, there might have been something in the cup, but all that he says is he associates it with divination and clairvoyance. So, was there
Mhm.
more than wine in the cup? I don't know. Maybe, but again, that's where the historian, you know, just
That's
says, "Here's what he says, folks. I mean, take it where you will."
And the what is the conclusion of the ritual? Is it some sort of like Zoroastrianos, where you take an astral flight and meet the son of human, you become individuated down here on Earth? What do you think was the culmination of each of these rituals?
I'm not actually sure, and I'm not sure that we could reconstruct that from the sermon. He constantly is using imagery of heavenly flight, escape from Egypt, is symbols of transcendence. And it's clear that as a Platonist, as a Christian Platonist, his ultimate vision of reality is you're not flesh, you're a divine mind, you're made of light. Anything that you associate with human emotions or even human personality that's not you, stop fooling yourselves. It doesn't matter if you personally survive. All that matters is that that male power in you is detached. That is
Mhm.
that pure mind, that pure spirit, and is brought home. And he doesn't say that that happens proleptically in the ritual, but I think ethics here is just as important as ritual, that the ethical practices, and the Nicene preacher is dead on committed to celibacy. This is the great thing, that's going to make modern people cringe, oh God, but he is dead on celibacy. And I think actually it's his radical ascetic ethics that are just as, perhaps even more important than these more, we might say, these more things that look like special rights. These ethics and detaching yourselves from the flesh and its passions, which is the goal of ethics for a Platonist,
Mhm.
is the way that you finally attain that heavenly state of transcendence. And I don't think that that happens at a particular time. I think that can happen at any time for this preacher.
Yeah, well, this is the way, as the Mandalorian would say. This Mandalorian would say that too. I do like James True, who's been a friend and a speaker. Voluntary waterboarding in the river gives a practitioner a near-death experience. That's something I've been speculating with. Obviously, like you said, David, we don't have proof in Christianity and other religions. If you watch Game of Thrones, that was one of the rituals where, but it's fun to think of John the Baptist, Jesus, oh, I want to be baptized. And he gets him until Jesus has like a mystical experience because he has no oxygen to his brain. But just speculating here. But speaking of speculation, don't some scholars think that the Naassenes were some sort of you talk about celibacy, but saying that they were actually some sort of sex cult, gay sex cult, you know?
Yeah, so I go in depth in this because a fellow colleague of mine, uh, Jonathan Kahana Bloom, makes this argument that the Naassenes are actually homoerotic, and I think they're homoerotic too. But he then goes on and says that they're actually engaged in homosexual behaviors. Um, and there has also been theories that it was an all male fraternity because, it doesn't actually mention um, females in the group, although I don't think that's plausible because he mentions lots of female heroes like Mariam and heroes, feminine heroes from the Hebrew Bible. Um, I think that, it's very hard for modern people to really grasp Platonism because Platonism, I think, is no longer cool. It's much cooler to say in our modern context, we need to be talking about embodiment. We need to be embracing the body as our true self and knowing the body and loving the body and, melting into the body. And we love the body. And I just, this is one of the things that, as a historian, I just kind of scratch my head over, because the Platonists are definitely not saying that. But interestingly, it's like you're between a rock and a hard place, because on the one hand, you want to say Platonists, they don't hate the body, right? They don't. They just don't care. I mean, they just do not care, because it's not you. And it would take too much energy to hate it. It would be too stupid and take up too much of your time to develop hatred for the body. But I think that what's going on, so this is sort of the political and ideological things going on in the background.
Mm.
But for me, and your listeners and your viewers, feel free to disagree with me. Join me on Patreon. I'm happy to talk to you about it. My sense of it is the Naascene preacher is a hardcore, and that means that he is absolutely against sex as part of his spirituality, and that doesn't matter if it's male female or male male or female female. He doesn't reject sex, but he spiritualizes it. He says that there is an unfading pleasure, and I think that's a sexual and homoerotic pleasure, but it's completely platonic in the sense that it's the same pleasure that is experienced between the human and the son of the human. And in a sense, they are having sex eternally. And if you're androgynous, you're like in an eternal state of having sex with yourself. I mean, think about it. The penis is always in the vagina. It's permanently attached.
Never
So
leave the house.
yeah, you never leave the house. You're there always. But I would insist that for the Nicene preacher, he's constantly harping on this idea of separate maleness from the femaleness here below, right? And I think for the Nicene preacher, it's equally problematic for a male to have sex with a male as a male to have sex with a woman, because from a Platonist perspective, that's, as Plato said in the Phaedo, it's nailing your mind to your passions. It's giving your spirit one more nail to rivet you to your emotions and your sexual drives. When in fact, the only reason we have sex is because of death. And it's just the flesh's way of reproducing itself. And if you were in a world without death, you would never give one thought toward actual physical intercourse, because that would just seem to you the most irrelevant thing in the world. But at the same time, you are androgynous, because real maleness and real femaleness is a spirit or noetic thing. And so that's why I disagree with Kahana Bloom. But again, I open it up for further discussion, and I'm happy to talk about it further.
No, this is great. I love it. Yeah. We've got Dr. David Litwa. If you have any super chats, you want to ask questions about these fascinating topics. Yeah, those ancients knew how to party and how to think. We think we're wild today in the 21st century. They had us beat in every way, shape, or form. But they did believe in reincarnation. That's probably something you say. Even though he doesn't explicitly say it, that's probably
Yeah, no,
lean
I'm
toward.
convinced of that. Yeah, I'm convinced
You
of
are.
that. But in Alexandria, that's actually the standard Christian position. Basilides, Carpocrates, and I've got a book on Carpocrates, and the Naascenes, they're all pro full-on transmigration. That's just the way that God works in the world. The system in which we are. It's the gymnasium of virtue. But that's totally banal to them. Whereas if you're in Rome or you're in Antioch or in Gaul, Christians, start spitting at you when you talk about not in Alexandria.
No, that's where all the cool kids hang out. Vance, any super chat or question from yourself?
Yeah, we do have a super chat, and I got some questions. We'll take Anand's question first. He says some sources state
Let's put it
that
out there.
the etymology of the word Vatican is divining serpent. Other sources state that this is a misinterpretation of Latin roots. Do you, David, have a perspective opinion on this?
I really don't. I mean, the Vatican is named after the Vatican Hill, of course. And I don't myself know, or I haven't looked up. And there's special dictionaries that you can use called etymological dictionaries, and you can get these, and it will tell you what the root of the meaning, what the root of the word is. And I just don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's not. I've not come across that, but that's publicly accessible. If your viewers just want to go to an academic library and search for Greek etymological dictionary or Latin etymological dictionary. Now, the problem with etymology is, um, you know, all of our normal words that we use also have etymologies, but that's not, we don't, you know, we're not thinking in terms of etymologies when we're using a word, so the question is, what does a word mean or sound like? Well, did they go back to the etymology or did they not go back to the etymology? Was that important for them? Interestingly enough, for the Nicene preacher, he doesn't really use, or sorry, he does use a lot of etymological exegesis, what I like to call. That is, he's interested in the root meaning of terms. But that must have sounded very weird even to his audience, because they just didn't think in terms of etymology. Like if I use the word automobile, it comes from auto, which is a Greek prefix meaning self, and mobile, which is a Latin suffix having to do with motion. So it's a self motion thing, literally. But when I refer to automobiles, that's really not what you're thinking. But yes, that's where the word does derive. So I don't know. I don't know. I'd be interested in the
Okay.
answer.
We got another super chat.
Yeah, I think it's from Neil himself. You better be ready, David.
Okay. Great Sage Lidwa. That's you, David. Was early Christianity competing with Eleusinian mysteries, Eleusinian mysteries, ritual magic, and salvation? He's abbreviating a lot here. The Naassenes preacher says, for the mystery is called Eleusin because we are spiritual flowing down from Adam above, for the word Eleusis. I'm sorry, I murdered that one, but you see it on the screen.
Right. Well, thank you, Neil. Yes, this is a good example of the Nicene preacher's love of etymology, because Eleusis is the name for a place. But yes, to a Greek speaker, that sounded like, as Neil says, Eleusis. It sounds like the normal word for to come and to go. So what the preacher does here is he say, he's not in competition at all with Eleusis. He, like I said, unlike all other Christians of antiquity and even today, he is a complete paganophile. That he loves the pagan mysteries, and I use pagan here in the kind of modern positive sense. I'm not using it as in the kind of critical sense where you bad pagans. No, I'm using it in the sense that just like modern pagans today embrace their pagan heritage, this is the Nicene preacher's view. He does not say, okay, I'm a Christian, therefore I'm not a Hellene. Other Christians like Tatian and Justin are saying exactly that. They're saying, I can't be a Christian and a Hellene. And Jerome has nightmares waking up because he memorized too much Cicero. So he's like, I shouldn't, this shouldn't be happening to me. But the Nicene preacher is saying very, very, very fascinatingly, he's the only Christian who's saying, give me the Eleusinian mysteries, give me the mysteries of Attis and Cybele, give me Adonis. I will embrace you and I will incorporate you into my megamyth, my monomyth. Now, from a modern perspective, this can also be viewed as equally problematic because, in our woke culture, this sounds a lot like cultural appropriation, and it is. It is, but it is the most genius and delightful cultural appropriation you will ever see. And it's something so fascinating because none of the other Christians are doing it. The other Christians are literally people like Justin and Irenaeus are sweating in their beds and worried about the demons in the temples. And you've got to realize that in their time, there were no churches. Christianity was just this weird, far out place, a weird, far out thing where you met in your home and you had a meal and you gave each other a kiss. But the main religion, you walk down Main Street and it's covered with smoke from burning altars and vast temples that are only husks, which we see today. And most Christians were saying those are the houses of demons, but the Nicene preacher was saying, bring it on. I want to be you, and I want you to be me, and I want you to realize that you're really worshiping Jesus, whether or not you know it or not. That's so weird, but that is what he's saying.
That brings a question to my mind that I had for you, which is Jesus. Does he believe that the physical incarnation of Jesus, that we all know and love and so forth, was the only one, or does he think Jesus appeared back in history? Since he seems to think Christianity extends throughout time, right? Because all these things that the Father and the Son have spread throughout, all these signs and symbols. So is Jesus the only one, or are there other Jesus back in the past? Is there any way we have telling from what we have?
Well, he's not like a Sethian, whereas a Sethian might say that, there was an incarnation of the Son of the Human in Seth and maybe in Melchizedek and in several others. It's interesting. The Nicene preacher, I think, thinks more broadly and more precisely than that, because what he's trying to say is he's not only trying to culturally appropriate the Hebrew tradition, he's trying to say that Jesus really is manifest in all Greco-Roman cults, including Judaism, but also in the Attis and Cybele cult and in the Zeus cult and in the Adonis cult and in the Osiris cult. So I think for him, he does say Jesus is born of Mary, and so that's pretty traditional, or as he says, Mariam. But I think he thinks incarnationally on a much broader level, whereas I think he would be comfortable saying Osiris is an incarnation of the Son of the Human, and Adonis of the Son of the Human, and Attis especially is an incarnation of the Son of the Human.
Hermes.
Stories, their stories, which are often traumatic and involve suffering, they're all pointing to the same reality.
Okay.
But as they talk about the logos too, he could be talking about them as
Yeah.
the logos, including Jesus.
Yeah. Oh, he's big on logos. Yeah. So, and that's why he's able to bring in Hermes, because for us, when we hear logos, Christians think of Jesus, but in Greco-Roman antiquity, the logos was Hermes, and the Nicene preacher is very aware of that, and so he spends a long time exegeting Homer's Odyssey, Book 24, and trying to explain to you why Hermes there is really Jesus. And it's the famous scene of Hermes leading the suitors down into Hades, and he completely, reverses all the meanings, which is fun. It must have been very frustrating to people who knew Homer very well. But I often bring this up to Dennis MacDonald and others, who are very, very emphatic that the gospel writers and are using Homer to build their narratives. And I think it's a shame that people like Dennis MacDonald, they don't look to the Nicene preacher, who is virtually our only evidence of a Christian going to Homer seriously and building a vast cathedral out of Homer and seeing Homer as Christian truth and a Christian text. That could help the case. But interestingly, the Nicene preacher is ignored. There's so much ignorance in the world, whereas the Nicene preacher, if I had my way in early Christianity, every Christian, and every spiritual person and every self-declaring Gnostic would know about the Naassenes, and they would be memorizing bits and pieces of his sermon as if they were the spiritual gems, which they are. That's my vision for the world. You guys are the only people who can make that a reality.
I'm on your side, that's for sure. For sure. Even though I've noticed in your Patreon, I think you've been cheating with Marcion for a little bit. I think the preacher Naassenes might have a word with you soon, but what doesn't the Great Declaration also talk about Homer? And the Essene preacher is familiar with it.
Yeah. So actually, the Nicene preacher uses the Great Declaration, and so just a preview for all your listeners. That is a Simonian text, and I've got my book on Simon coming out here soon as well, a full book on Simon of Samaria. And yes, that text also refers to the famous holy moly in Homer. And so stay tuned for more on that. But it shows you that Christians of the late 2nd century were reading Homer. So we can use those texts to scientifically date when Christians were engaging with Homer, and in what ways.
Very exciting. Well, we can't wait for that one. Well, I know you're sick and it is getting late. I guess, yeah. Thank you, Anon. Thank you, Neil, Gnostic Informant. I hope I'm not doxing you and you're going to swap me or something, but thank you. I think Esoteric Teachings. Thank you very much for your support. Well, let's promote some of David. Let me do a little share screen because this one I'm excited about. I am part of David's Patreon and I love it. Content all the time, papers, videos. Again, he's been riffing on Marcion recently, and it's great because I'm getting new insights on Marcion, and just really good content. So yeah, definitely support him on his Patreon. But you have a share screen. You have a course which I want to show the audience. Where is it? Window. There you go. Share. Can everybody see it? Yes. Tell us about this new course.
Yeah, so I am committed to bringing the ancient Gnostic texts into the public light and the public domain. And so I have a course where I go through every single text in the Nag Hammadi library and I walk you through it. And I've introduced part 1 of that course. So that goes through the first half of the Nag Hammadi library. That course is now live. I'm still tinkering a little bit, but it is finished and you can go check that out. That will give you lifetime access to my intro. It's got about now 5 hours of video content. It's got a lot of my articles and writings in PDF and some other scholarly literature. And I've designed that just as I would teach any other undergraduate course. And you'll get an opportunity to discuss with me anything related to Gnostic and Nag Hammadi literature. And you'll get lifetime opportunity to pose questions with regard to that topic to me. So check it out. I really appreciate all the interest and support.
Yeah, it's an amazing deal. $49.99 for 5 hours. Whew. That's a good deal. And you're going to learn a lot, especially about these texts. And David always brings so much extra to these things. So, yeah, check it out. I will have this on the show notes on the YouTube and on Rockfin, and I'll have it on the show notes in the audio version. So, yeah, please support David and please support this show and all other independent podcasters and scholars that are making, as I call it, the virtual Alexandria, all this knowledge accessible, which is amazing, which is truly amazing, and so much to learn about these ancient heretics. So awesome. Well, we are at the end. I hope the chat wasn't too chatico, but Vance, thanks for being here. Everything was good.
Yeah, everything's good. Hello out there, everybody. Thank you all. And David, thank you. It was very interesting. I learned something. I always do.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah. And as I say, you guys are, with your base, you're the only way the Naassenes can gain a voice in the world. And I really appreciate you guys and everyone who came along today. Thank you so much. It's been a rough 2023 for me. And I want to just say thanks to everybody who has sent words of support and for your kindness over the months and years. I really appreciate everybody and allowing scholars like me, the apostle of the heretics, to survive. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you.
Oh, thank you for everything you do, David. And yeah, we appreciate it. And yeah, things can only get better. And hopefully this year will be better for some of us. Yeah, 2023 was not, it was okay for me, but yeah, definitely some challenges. But everything goes around, and hopefully Agathon Diamond will smile upon us, right, David?
Yes, sir.
Maybe we need some serpents on our doorways. That'll fix everything. Who knows? All right. Well, David, as always, it's great to have you on your show. I will certainly promote the Naassenes and make them bring them out into the world. And yeah, look forward to your book on the Simonians and the big rock star himself, the Mick Jagger and Jim Morrison of the Gnostics, Simon himself. So thanks as always for being here.
Thank you.
And for everybody else, good night, take care, and enjoy the rest of your 2024 because it's just begun. Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Our hearts beat to the city streets. We began to feel the fire. We rise like tall buildings as the candle